Welcome to the Penn State Wrestling Show from Blue White Illustrated. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. The star of the show, Greg Pickel, here to provide you the latest on what's going on with the Nittany Lions wrestling team. It is post-Olympic time. It's also pre-season time, so a little bit of a sleepy part of the schedule. But, Greg, there's always news. So what are we talking about today?
Yeah, let's get into it first. I think while the Olympic freestyle scene was the recent event that had everyone's attention, some news that will roll us ahead to the next Olympic cycle, came out recently. Roman Bravo Young, obviously the multi-time national champion from Penn State, who competed in this year's past Olympics from for Team Mexico at 57 kilograms as a member of the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, is moving on. And if you've been following along this offseason, where he's going next should be of no surprise, because he is going to go join another fellow Nittany Lion who moved on this offseason too. So Roman Bravo Young joining the Oklahoma State Regional Training Center out in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So for Penn State, I don't know if it's a huge surprise. David was always going to, if he was going to build up his RTC, or we'll call it moving forward, the Regional Training Center of Olympics. If he was going to build that up, he was going to have to get some names there, and there were some there. So it's not like he was starting 100% from scratch, but it made sense for someone to go out there from the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, and maybe more will in the future. We'll see. But Dayton Fix is already out there. He's a very prominent, of course, college wrestling name and member of the Olympic group out there in Oklahoma State already. And now Roman Bravo Young is going to go out and join them too. So two things interest me here. Number one being that I honestly thought Roman Bravo Young, after his 0-4 at the Olympics, which wasn't a huge shock, that was a good weight class he wrestled in. And his, again, I think we sometimes forget, we'll talk about this in a minute, but these guys spend a lot more time focused on folk style wrestling and the college wrestling season than they do the freestyle stuff during most of their Olympic cycle when they're in college. So, these guys don't have the same experience at the international level in most cases, so not a huge surprise there. But I thought maybe he would go right into MMA. I did have that thought cross my mind that maybe Roman Bravo Young was going to give up on wrestling and go right into MMA. That is not clearly the case or the plan at this point. So he is the first NLWC guy since the Olympics to go and join David Taylor out of Oklahoma State. We'll see how that works out. We'll see if anybody else follows him there. But yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, what do you think the impact is on this particular dynamic, and how does this affect Penn State? I don't know. I don't know how to phrase the question, because it's obviously Roman Bravo Young is a name in wrestling. He's a very good wrestler.
Yep.
What impact does this have, I guess, in the long term or the short term? What do you see this as more important for?
Yeah, so when you look at, I think, let me just start with the Roman Bravo Young side of it, and then I'll move on to the Penn State side of it. But for him, he trained with Thomas Gilman, who's, of course, one of the wrestlers that one of the coaches that went with David Taylor to Penn State. Obviously a very accomplished wrestler and everything in his own right, who was at the NLWC previously, rather. Easy for me to say today. But, I think that makes sense, that weight makes sense. It's no offense to Penn State and what is still at Penn State, but I think that you don't have to live under a rock to realize it. Penn State, it's lightweights, especially in the NLWC. They don't have maybe as many as some other places. I think that's where it hurts Penn State the most, is that you don't have Roman Bravo Young, that guy that can wrestle 57 kilograms, 133 pounds, whatever it might be, in your room any longer. And obviously those guys compete with current college wrestlers, and they also obviously train with guys who also want to wrestle internationally and go to the Olympics, and Gilman was in that same area as well. So I think, to me, that probably is the biggest loss for Penn State, that just the fact that you lose that presence in your room. But at the same time, I just feel like, T. Frank, that, Roman Bravo Young's a guy that, is very, never been afraid to try something new or to try something that may not work out. So I think that the move makes sense for him from that perspective. And then the other side of it is just that I'm sure there was some money involved. And, again, I think David Taylor needs to make some splash moves to get this ROTC off the ground and where he wants it to go to. Not that it's not already produced some wrestlers and this has had success, but he's putting his stamp on it now, right? So I just think that's sort of, I think if you thought he was is going to take no one from the NLWC for whatever the reasons may be. I think that you were probably hoping for something to happen that was never going to happen. And then, I just think that from the Penn State side of it, it's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination. Would you love to have that guy in your room? Yeah, of course. But, again, you were going to probably almost certainly lose at least one or two guys anyway. So you're going to lose some weight, some presence, no matter what.
Yeah. So any other final thoughts there in terms of does Penn State need to react or find different options in that area? It feels like they're probably pretty well stocked. And I guess what's the next thing then on the rundown?
Yeah, so, just to wrap that part of it up, no, I don't think so. Could they go out and add somebody new? Yeah, of course. There's no question about that. But do they need the race to go do so? No. And so we'll see how that all plays out. Honestly, I think, like probably most people listening, I'm just most curious, does anybody else go to David Taylor's RTC out there at Oklahoma State and follow Roman Bravo Young in leaving the NLWC? So no indications of that yet. We'll have to wait and see. But I think that to move on to the next part of our rundown, which is just kind of a quick reaction, some final thoughts on the Olympics. Aaron Brooks finishing third, the only Penn State, true Penn State connection to hit the medal stand, with, of course, Zane Rutherford having to unfortunately medically default out of the chase for bronze. Picked up a couple NLWC, had 4 of the 6 weight classes there, and the men leave, the U.S. men leave without a freestyle gold for the first time in a really long time. I would not be rushing to both think the state of men's freestyle wrestling in the United States is a total and abject disaster. I would also not be rushing to equate Roman Bravo Young leaving right after the Olympics and that performance to some kind of. Keep in mind he wrestled for Team Mexico, so that's the first thing. Yeah. If you're trying to make that argument, you got to. We're not talking about Team USA with him. It's Team Mexico for Roman Bravo Young, even though he trained with the NLWC. But if you're trying to make a connection and try and draw a straight line to Roman Bravo Young leaves and maybe the Olympics didn't go exactly as everyone thought they would, I don't think that's the case whatsoever. I don't think that. The world is ending because the U.S. men's freestyle team did not win a gold. I think that when you look at kind of how this team was constructed, it was a bit of a transition year, and I know the hopes were raised because some of the top competitors weren't there for whatever reason from other countries. So, that was a part of it too. But again, Aaron Brooks, not all that experienced at the senior level internationally or domestically for that matter, really. Zane Rutherford.
I know this is not fair, but I want to play the what if game because one moment kind of decided all of this show essentially, that he beats David Taylor. David Taylor then becomes the coach at Oklahoma State, and America doesn't have a gold medal in the Olympics. Right. If that's reversed, do you think David Taylor would have come through and been able to get that gold medal, or do you think like the field was just that, David Taylor reaching the end of his wrestling career, this was just, as you mentioned, a transition year?
Yeah, no, it's a fun question, and it's fascinating to think about. To me, after watching the way David went through the last Olympic cycle where he didn't compete, and the U.S. men, quite frankly, did not compete in a lot of the ranking events and the seeding events and things like that. So I had questions all along, just kind of where he was in this journey. Was it becoming too much for him? So on and so forth. And then when he got beat by Aaron Brooks, it kind of felt to me like the answer to those questions were a very obvious yes. Then he ends up at Oklahoma State, and we end up here talking about Roman Bravo Young going to join him at Oklahoma State. So I would be hard pressed to say yes, and it almost feels silly to say because the guy is a reigning U.S. Gold medal winner, rather. So certainly that was all 4 years is a long time in wrestling. So, do I think that the field, do I think he would have put himself in a position Aaron Brooks did, where I think there's a lot of people, it's much smarter than I, that think that his lack of experience is what got him beat late in the semifinals. Does David Taylor put himself in that spot? Probably not. Is David Taylor in the spot where he's leading that late? I don't know that answer, of course. So it's a very fair question, though. But yeah, ultimately, the sky is not falling on U.S. men's freestyle wrestling. The same goes for the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. But again, the men will have to be better in 4 years when the Olympics come to Los Angeles. There's no question. But again, I think you look at that state of that team, it was some transition time, and when you look ahead to the future, as far as it released as it relates to what Penn State participation could be there moving forward. Greg Kirkfleet, rather, after this year at Penn State, his final one, will almost certainly be a part of the 125 kilogram conversation. I would be shocked if Aaron Brooks went anywhere. He's probably going to move up in weight. I think we've seen him for the last time at 86 kilograms, probably going up to 92, but not the end of the world there. 65 could be a spot of transition. I'm not sure what the future holds for Nick Lee, the new Penn State assistant wrestling coach, of course, who was beat by Zane Rutherford in the U.S. team trials. Rutherford on the cut, of course, from 70 kilograms, where he was a world champ, to 65 kilograms, which is the Olympic weight. Instead of 75 kilograms, so there's probably some change coming there. So I think there's definitely going to be some different faces in different places for the next Olympic cycle, and I think it'll end up being a much better and successful showing, even though I don't go as far as some others do and feel completely like this was an abject failure for the U.S. men there.
Right. So that'll be my last what-if question, make you speculate on anything. I guess the last thing is schedule news, and as you mentioned, crumbs or nuggets, full-on nuggets coming out about what's going to be going on with the schedule in the next couple of weeks as we get closer to the season. So what are you looking for, and what can fans look for at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com?
Yeah, that's the perfect word to use. I'm looking for schedule info. So we are reaching the time, this time a year ago, some different teams at Penn State would end up wrestling during the 2023-2024 dual meet season started to put out their schedules. And, some of them included Penn State. Penn State did not release its full schedule until like mid-October, which is not all that uncommon for the Big Ten, just sort of the way the Big Ten does business, or at least how it has done business in the past. So I do think we'll start to see some of those non-conference dual meets. It'll be interesting to meet Frank. You remember well, I'm sure, that the start of last season, in part because of the Olympics and the way the schedule set up, was very slow for Penn State. They only had a couple dual meets in the first half of the year. I think they went to a tournament or two, if memory serves, but not everybody went to those. So be curious to see how the schedule may look a little bit different this year in terms of the way the dual meets are spaced out. And then we'll see what events besides dual meets Penn State partakes in during the regular season. So all told, the thing I'm watching for now is some of that news is going to start to come out, and we'll see, what we find out about who Penn State will be competing against this year. And before we know it, practices will be underway, and we'll be talking about the different weight breakdowns and all that good stuff leading into the new season.
All right. Well, where can people follow along? And a lot of people are watching on the site, but just let people know what you've got going on at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
Yeah, so keep an eye out on our wrestling page over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can follow both of us on Twitter for the latest podcasts and things like that we have, football, wrestling, recruiting, all that good stuff. And then, I think that the weight by weight series is going to make its triumphant return after a bit of a longer hiatus than I anticipated it to. So we're up into the middleweights now. So we'll be talking about that here on the show in the weeks to come, and we'll have some stories about that as well over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So, and again, before we know it, T. Frank, we're not going to be talking about who could compete at these various weights where Penn State must replace some very talented guys. We're going to be talking about who actually is on the mat and what they're doing, because the season will be here without question before we know it.
Yeah, students are returning. Depending on when you listen to this, it might be full-on move-in weekend, and it's always an exciting time. You get the buzz that fall sports are. I was explaining to some non-sports friends because they're like, oh, what's going on this time of year? And I'm like, well, prepare to have all of it. That's kind of where we're heading towards, and it's a very exciting time for people who are sports fans, especially the Olympic sports like wrestling. And we'll have your information and your conversation about the Penn State wrestling team here on Penn State Wrestling Show from Blue White Illustrated.